Good morning. Welcome to the Audit and Performance Committee of Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board. And today, Monday, the 26th of September 2022. I'm Beth Hamilton, and I have the privilege, I think, of chairing this committee. And this is my first meeting of the committee, so bear with me if there's something that I don't get right. Could I also welcome two other new permanent members, which is Councillor David Illingworth and Sheila McCall. And the other appointments are Donald, I've forgotten your name, Donald. I'm going to say McNeil. Donald McPherson, who has been on the committee before but is now a permanent member. And the other two permanent members are Sandy Watts and Bernie Campbell. I'm aware that there's a lot of new faces on this meeting, but in light of the length of the agenda, what we're going to do is just ask people when you first come on camera to speak, or in the chamber, if you could just introduce yourself just so we're all aware of who you are. As I mentioned, it's a long agenda, so we are assuming that people have read the papers. So there will be a brief overview of each of the papers and then we'll have the time for discussion. So after the welcome, can I just confirm if there are any apologies?
Thanks, Chair. No, we've had no formal apologies for the meeting this morning.
Thank you. We'll move on then to declarations of interest. Just this timely reminder that members are reminded of their obligation to declare any financial or non-financial interests which they have in any item in this agenda in accordance with the Joint Board Code of Conduct. Is there anybody who wishes to make a declaration? Nope. Okay, thank you for that. Right, we'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. One of the challenges we have today is that there are not as many members here at the new group as were present for the meeting that we're looking at of the 7th of March. But could I have any comments or any points of note? Nope. I think the only two members that could have been at the last meeting were Donald and Sandy. Could you propose? Is Sandy there to second? She's not. I think we had a brief discussion of this potentially happening. I think we've agreed that what we will do is just accept that it's accurate through Donald's confirmation. Okay. This is moving smoothly. We'll move on now to the action point update. There's only one action, which I think Jane's going to update us on.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Smith, Head of Finance and Corporate Services. In relation to the outstanding action, that relates to a risk workshop for the IJB. That's an outstanding action for some time, but we are now on target to have that in November. And I've been working with colleagues across Tayside with learning from the approaches they've taken to ensure we have a good session and can take forward our risk management arrangements from there.
Thank you, Jane. Any comments, any questions? Nope. Okay, thank you. And finally, around the minutes of the previous meeting, are there any issues or matters arising from this that are not being picked up on the agenda that anyone wants to highlight? Nope. Okay, thank you for that. Right, well, moving on now to the performance, and one of the major items on the agenda is the financial position, and this is a report by the Head of Finance and Corporate Services, Jane. So I'll hand over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to report in the first finance report of this year an overall underspend of £0.5 million with no requirement for the use of reserves. That is a change from plan where there was a requirement for use of reserves, and the key areas where there's been movement have been firstly in relation to the prescribing position, which has improved against plan. We've had the benefit financially of slippage in investment in our older people's services that was set out in our older people's strategic delivery plan. Both of these benefits to the financial position have been offset by, most significantly, unachieved savings as a result of a change in Scottish Government guidance and in 2C practice costs in Angus and Dundee health and social care partnerships. The only other issue I would want to raise is in relation to reserves, and particularly the COVID reserve. Members will see that we're forecasting significant COVID spend, and that's due to be offset by COVID reserves. Over and above that, discussions are continuing with the Scottish Government about the potential return of reserves that are not required in this financial year to meet COVID spend. And as we come on to the external audit report later in the meeting, that's an issue that is being picked up by external audit, and it would be probably wise to leave that issue for discussion at that point. But I'm very happy to take any questions on the finance paper.
Thank you, Jane. Have we any questions or points of clarity?
Sorry,
Sorry,
I don't know how to raise a hand here. What's the best way of bringing, if I want to ask a question?
I'm sure that if you put it in the chat, we'll be able to pick it up from there. Sheila?
Okay, thank you.
Donald?
It's not really my day, is it? Thank you. Two questions, if I may, please. The first one is it's in paragraph 3.3, where you refer to one of the causes of the underspend is care at home being 200,000 under, but then you mentioned that that's resulting in a level of unmet need, which doesn't sound such a good thing. So firstly, if you could give some indication of what we're doing to mitigate that unmet need. And the second one was in paragraph 5, you mentioned some of the financial risks. It may not be possible at this stage in the year, but I suppose I was trying to get a sense of what the amount is, what the quantum is of these financial risks, and if you're able to either for this paper or perhaps in future meetings, give a little sense of what the ranges are. I'm conscious if we're talking about, for example, a salary increase, it might be every 1% higher means an increase of X. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies. I'll take the risk question first, but perhaps Zoe may be able to answer your question around the actions being taken to address unmet need. Donald, in relation to risk, you're absolutely right. In previous reports, we have done exactly what you suggested and have a schedule which sets out the broad quantum against each of the risks, and we'll bring that forward for the next meeting. Thank you.
Aye, with regard to unmet need, Care at Home have developed 2 Living Well teams to pick up the unmet need in rural locations. One team has been fully recruited to, and the second team is looking to be fully recruited to within the next fortnight or so. And we anticipate that will not clear the unmet need, but certainly make a significant dent in terms of the unmet need that we're experiencing at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. Sheila, I haven't heard any word, but were you wanting to ask a question?
I was, please, if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is around the COVID reserves and their criteria of that they might be clawed back by the Scottish Government. And what is the unallocated COVID reserves? I'm not quite sure if I understand what's here. So maybe just so it's a wee bit in plain English for me, please.
Thank you, Sheila. Just to set this into context, as things stand at the moment, we are looking at a remaining balance after taking into account all of our forecast spend for this year of £9.7 million. And across Scotland, it's that, well, 9.7 million for us, and the equivalent figures for the other health and social care partnerships that we're in discussion at a national level with the Scottish Government about returning unused funds to support COVID costs across the wider health care system in Scotland. So for us, it's we're looking at a possible £9.7 million return of reserves to the Scottish Government.
So you mentioned that some of the conversations around the unmet health needs. What about the unmet social care needs?
So just to try to be clear, Sheila, where we are able to demonstrate spend in year that can be directly related to COVID, then the Scottish Government are funding those in full. And we, just as in the previous 2 years, we are setting those out, we're forecasting them, and they are being covered. The Scottish Government are reviewing those, they're scrutinising them, they're making sure they're legitimate, and where they're not, we're being asked to fund them in a different way. But COVID reserve is for COVID costs, and we have to be able to directly link any costs to funding. In relation to unmet need, that's a discussion about an underspend in the position, driven by the fact that we have a budget and we're not able to actually spend the money because we've not got the capacity at the in place to do so. Hence, we're undertaking redesign in order to be able to do so.
Okay. The reason I ask, and first of all, I want to be absolutely clear that I was understanding it properly, so thank you for explaining that. The reason I ask is that, as some of you may know, I have a family member who gets care at home, and he was without any care at all on Friday because his support worker had COVID. So I had to step in, but it's occurring to me, I mean, I know there's a rollout of COVID and winter flu vaccinations at the moment, but the care sector, the care at home sector in particular, as I understand it, is fairly stretched for resources and staff as it is, in terms of getting enough staff. And I'm just wondering what provision we may have put in place over and above the planned spend, that we might need to call upon the COVID reserves if these care providers had to perhaps bring in agency staff or other staff to be able to respond quickly to situations where at very short notice care could not be provided.
Thanks, Sheila. Zoe, could you come in on this one, please?
Yeah, no, Sheila, I'm not. When you refer to care at home, are you referring to a supported living, supported accommodation provider, i.e. a learning disability mental health type provider, as opposed to an older people
someone who goes into someone's home and supports them?
Because the care at home that's referred to in the paper is in relation to older people care, as opposed to an adult with a learning disability.
I don't actually care which one it is. I just know that people receive care at home, whether they're older people, whether they're learning disabilities. And if those care providers who go into their homes on a daily or a planned basis test positive for COVID and they cannot attend, the care providers, like lots of other suppliers, are stretched at the moment, and as far as I can see, some of them may not have the contingency in place to be able to bring in agency staff, which is considerably more expensive and very often at very short notice, because you just can't predict this sort of thing. So I'm not really precious about whether it's. I just cited that one as an example because it was quite pertinent. And while I was able to step in and provide support, that's not always the case for other people who are out there who may not have a voice that they can raise. So I'm just wondering what provision we've made, or should we make some provision for those sorts of exceptional COVID-related incidents, because COVID is still with us, and the people who work in that sector, are more likely, they're more at risk, I suppose, because of the nature of the work that they do. So while I understand that we have provision in place for things that are planned, this is more for unplanned events that are COVID related. And what provision do we have for that out of the 9.7 million? Or is the 9.7 million allowing for that, or should we make some provision?
Jane will maybe come back in relation to the finance, but we have a very significant agency spend at the moment, certainly, Sheila, which is propping up providers and has been propping up providers through the entirety of COVID. We also have the extraordinary expenditure process that we've been supporting since the outset as well, but you'll possibly be aware that the Scottish Government is removing that additional funding. At the moment, the Social Care Support Fund is there to support our providers. So we ask that they do have contingency plans in places. But as you say, COVID is unpredictable and it has to be dealt with as and when. And it is unfortunate that family members are asked to support in these situations, but sometimes it is unavoidable. However, agency cover at the moment shouldn't be as problematic as it was in any way. We're not experiencing that, certainly, because we're not having the same level of outbreak that we had before. So providers should be able to access that, and we always support providers in terms of how they're able to fund those situations.
Okay, well, it was just because it cropped up and it's happened once or twice, and you know that while there's a degree of, if it happened today, I couldn't, for example, because I'm here. Yeah. So, exactly. So it's I'm just a wee bit concerned about this clawback of COVID reserves. You know, when we don't know what's going to come ahead. And we already know that the demand for our services in terms of social care and support for people in that sector locally is significant. And you know, I'm also mindful that there's contributions that come from Perth and Kinross Council, so I would be quite concerned if there was a large clawback of our COVID reserves, and then that money had to be found from Perth and Kinross Council, who themselves are under significant cost pressures in terms of structural deficits. So I have a real concern about that whole aspect of it. So I think we'll keep an eye on it, maybe. But thank you for that answer. Thank you.
If I can just come back in and provide assurance that in our forecasting for the year end, we are being extremely cognizant of the uncertainty of the current landscape, and are making sure that there is significant or at least an appropriate level of cushion built in to ensure that exactly the type of issue that you raise, so that we are not left in a position where we've passed back funding. If that's ultimately what happens and we don't have sufficient funds to meet our costs, we will make sure that that is absolutely mitigated against by the careful nature by which we approach the forecast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jane. I think it's maybe something to bring up with the social work team as well, to just remind providers that that provision is available to them if we do have provision to recruit agency staff in these circumstances. Because somebody could have been left high and dry with no support at all for about 2 or 3 days, so anyway, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Jane or points of clarity? The only one thing I was going to ask, if I can, is about we'll talk about is it Buvidal for the methadone replacement? And we seem to be acknowledging that is a financial risk, but it seems to be that we're going to have to meet that cost. So is it something where we're still waiting on the ADP confirmation that they will cover that on a non-recurring basis? But I was just seeking clarity. Would we, something like that we know is going to be a recurring cost, should we be looking at it as a recurring basis rather than non-recurring?
You're absolutely right, Beth. For this financial year, it's expected to be covered by the ADP reserve, and we're waiting for that confirmation. And when we roll into our budget setting that started for next year, you'll see it flowing through as a budget pressure that we're building into our budget setting for next year.
Thank you for that. Any other final points that we want to raise at this stage? Okay, so the recommendation on this paper that we note the overall projected outturn is a 0.5 million underspend, and there's no requirement to use reserve to deliver financial balance. To note the forecast of 5.7 million COVID-19 costs, which are funded in full by the IGB COVID-19 reserve at this point, and to note a number of financial risks that may still impact. Okay, we'll move on. Next item on the agenda is the annual performance report. This is something that the Chief Officer will normally pick up, but she's off today. So unfortunately for poor Jane, we're going to hand over the pressure seat to her. Thanks, Jane.
Well, thank you, Beth. It's an absolute pleasure to bring forward the 2021-22 annual performance report for Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. It's a format that reflects a change in our presentational approach. We are extremely keen to make sure that the IGB and that the partnership have a annual report that can meet the needs of a broader range of readership, and we've tried to learn from good practice that exists out with our area across Scotland in terms of making sure that our annual report is accessible to a wider range of readers. We hope that it reflects the scale of activities undertaken during the year and the improvements that we've made during a year that's continued to be impacted significantly by COVID. But we also hope that it gives strong account of the amazing work that's been done by the staff across the Health and Social Care Partnership and by our independent and third sector providers to both continue to respond to the pandemic, but to take forward significant improvement in line with the IJB strategic plan. I'm going to hand over briefly to Chris just to carry on from there in terms of our approach to performance.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, just a couple of extra comments. I appreciate your introductions. It was just to let the committee know that the reports presented in that new format, as Jane's mentioned, given a varying layers of complexity and detail. But taken together, it would be hoped that the report gives a very good overarching view of the size and scale of the organisation, the activities undertaken, and when taken together, these components throughout the report with the national indicators provide an appropriate overarching sense of progress made in pursuance of the strategic ambitions of the Integration Joint Board and notably in pursuance of the National Health and Wellbeing outcomes. We do recognise the need to move to a position which is significantly more outcome focused, and we've made one step towards that with the format and content of this report versus previous years, but we recognise there's still a way to go there, and the steps that have been taken in that regard relate to the introduction of performance management frameworks for older peoples, for LD autism, for community mental health and wellbeing, and soon for carers and primary care. So those are being developed throughout the course of this year, and two of them have already been approved. And as we move to the future performance reporting, we'll have a much greater opportunity to link the activities that were undertaken with movement in performance and therefore achievement of outcomes. That's the move that we'll make, as I say, through the course of this year, and as I say, we'll create much more opportunity for that outcome focus. Happy to pause there and take questions.
Thank you for that. I'd just like to start by commenting on the layout. Obviously, this is my first real look at the annual performance report, but I really value particularly the informatics, the style, the patient stories, our client stories. But I'll hand over now for a bit of discussion. We'll start with David Dillinger.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's obviously been an awful lot of work put into this report, and I wonder if there is any understanding of who reads the report and how many people read the report.
Thank you, David. That's exactly what we're discussing as an executive management team at the moment, because I think what we've recognised is that the way in which the report was previously produced, circulated and made available did not do justice to the work of the partnership. So what we're working on at the moment as an executive management team and with the support of our communication and engagement subgroup is an approach that makes sure with a document that's been approved by the IJB that we have a platform and more success in getting it out into the public domain. Now that we have something that we believe people can pick up and understand in a different way. So that's work in progress, the communication and engagement plan to support exactly what you describe as needed.
David, is this a supplementary to that? Yeah. Go.
Yeah, I didn't really have enough time over the weekend to study it in depth, but the sense I got was it was confusing to me as a newbie to this organisation. It was long, and I got the sense it was like a holiday brochure. It had lots of great statements, lots of one-off comments from service users that I didn't really get a sense, well, this is what the organisation is doing as a performance. So I felt, as a newbie, I felt it was confusing. So I'm sorry to be negative about it.
No, thank you, David. We appreciate the feedback. I think one of the things that we've been looking at is how we take this and create summarised versions that perhaps really kind of sharply allow that better communication for those that perhaps don't have detailed service knowledge of any particular area. But the information is there to allow us to create different vehicles to communicate. So no, we need the feedback, absolutely.
I think maybe one of the ways of looking at it when I was accessing it was thinking that if it was somebody that had a particular interest in learning disabilities, for example, they would focus on the section on learning disabilities, and that gives them the totality of that. But I get what you're saying, it's quite a lengthy document. I think I was going to reflect on that at the end of the meeting. Some of the documents I think are a bit too lengthy for a realistic discussion, but we can move on to that. But thank you for your comments. As Jane said, they're always appreciated. Donald, can I hand over to you?
Thank you. Yep, third time lucky. Yeah, I think it is a very good report. I like the style of it. I can see there has been progress made, and I think, for example, I think the case studies, the journey wheel, they're all good devices that help to bring it to life. I do understand where David's coming from. I think there's one there's one logical piece that feels to me to be missing, and I think it's something to take away for next year. Is we've got the 5 strategic outcomes, but I think we could do with a section right at the front of the document that focuses on these are the strategic outcomes. These are the specific measures that we're tracking into. We can then track progress year on year. And yeah, I think, as you said earlier, we're part of the way to that journey. So it would be good if we get a chance to look at next year's version at a stage where we can influence that. But I think that's the piece that's missing. But I think you're on the journey to fill that in. So a lot of good work here, and well done.
If I could just come back, thank you for your feedback as well, Donald, and we would absolutely recognise that the strategic objectives are not there up front, kind of almost as the starting point. I think that probably reflects the fact that 21-22 has very much been a year of response to COVID, response to Scottish Government in terms of funding coming out and what's been expected to be done with that, as opposed to being driven by the IJB and the strategic objectives. We're moving into new territory. We've got strategic delivery plans that the IJB have approved, and therefore you're absolutely right. Coming to this next year at this time, strategic objectives and then going on to talk about how we're delivering against them will be far easier, in that we're kind of entering kind of back to some sense of normality with the IJB in the driving seat as opposed to COVID.
Thank you. Councillor Sheila McCall, you've got a question and a comment?
I have, actually. I think David's question was excellent. I'm not sure if we quite answered who is the audience for this or who gets this information, apart from this board and perhaps the full IJB. I quite like the layout simply because I like graphics as opposed to lots of words. But actually, when you plough down through it, if I put my personal hat on, I would be quite difficult to understand how the performance related to my personal circumstances or those that I care for. So I think it's worthwhile, thinking about how we lay out. I mean, I think the content is good, and like I said, I do like the graphics. But I think it's a wee bit, since David brought that up, I haven't thought about it, but now that he has, a lot of the actual tables with the performance measures themselves are way down the report quite a bit. I'm not sure what page number they're on, but they're quite a bit down. And perhaps for the purposes of this committee, those areas that are red and amber might be the ones that we might need to focus on a little bit when presenting a report like this, to help us understand where where things are negative and where things have improved, what other lessons we can learn elsewhere, rather than just a standard, the standard document is fine and it's a catch-all. I'm assuming for a multi-audience. But right now, I think that for this committee, I would like to be focusing in on if I'm just picking one here, one at random, percentage of people with positive experience of care at their GP practice has gone down 12.3%. So I think sitting on this audit and performance committee, I would like to have more of a discussion around what those issues are, because the good news issues are great, but in order for the IGB to be effective and this committee to be effective, I would have thought, and the Health and Social Care Partnership therefore to deliver to the requirement and the needs of our citizens, then I think we need to be looking and seeing what are the issues associated with that aren't being delivered. 12.3% is quite a big drop.
Thank you, Sheila. And again, I would absolutely recognise your comments. The one thing I would say is you're absolutely right. The Audit and Performance Committee have a really important role, and that role is fulfilled throughout the year. And what precedes this document has been regular reports on the kind of core indicator set. So from a committee perspective, there should be no particular surprises. But I think with a new committee, now is the opportune time to consider what does come forward with the chair, what does come forward at each meeting, and then how that is reflected in the annual performance report at the end of the year. We're in a really strong position now to kind of take the learning from today, and then with a new membership is consider what good looks like in terms of ongoing regular reporting, and then the annual performance report at the end of the year.
Yeah, I do understand, but I'm just new to this committee as well, so I suppose we're not coming into a vacuum entirely. But I think it would be helpful to, even just since it is a new committee, to be able to say these are the things that have been discussed before, these are the recovery plans where we're not performing, and we will look at them in future meetings. So I don't think that's explicit, unless I've missed it, but I don't think that's explicit in the report or anywhere in the papers. So that's what I would like to take away from that. But you've kind of answered the question I was going to ask as well, so that's fine, thank you.
Thanks for that, Sheila. I think also we'll be able to pick up some of those areas in the Partnership Improvement Plan section, where I think that's where we might be talking about how we're reporting, how we're monitoring that. But thank you for those points. Could I just maybe...
Just another comment, and it's just, so that's fine, so we might talk about something later on, but it's... somehow we've got to think about how because otherwise we're going to have to remember that paper, go back to it and look and see, is it picking up everything? So somehow to bring these together as a cohesive document set so we can signpost them, even if it's in the document. Right now it's just, there's an awful lot of reading and an awful lot of information, and it's very hard to capture all of it and understand it all.
Thank you. I think the other point, I don't know if we did clarify for both you and David, was the intended audience, and I think it's a multifaceted audience we're looking at, and for people to take what they want out of it in the formats. On that basis, could I maybe ask Sandy or Bernie as their public partner reps to give us their thoughts on how accessible the document would be if they're there?
Hello, I'm here, Sandy.
Thanks, Sandy. Sorry to put you on the spot. It's just, it'd be really good from a public partner perspective to get your feel of how the document reads and how accessible it is for the people that you're working with.
I think I agree with the points that have been made. For anyone who's not familiar with looking at lengthy documents like that, and who is a service user, I suspect it's quite hard to find what they're looking for and to actually be able to relate it to their own personal experiences, as Sheila said earlier. I like the graphics, and I think it's reasonably easy to look down, but trying to make sense of that then and relate it to how somebody's feeling and how somebody is accessing services themselves, I think could be quite hard. I can't at the moment just think of how that could be made any better. But I do think it's something that could be looked at for next year. Sorry, I don't think
Thanks,
that's
Sandy.
particularly helpful.
Thank you. Bernie?
Yes, hi. So I would actually probably agree with what Sandy has said from our point of view as the carer rep. So obviously any information that comes through to us, we would share with our unpaid carers at our carers voice meeting. I think out with that, I really am not sure how many people would actually have access to the report or read it. I do think that it is fair to say that, and I think it was a comment earlier, that if somebody has a concern or is interested in it, if it's divided into sections, they will home into the part that's pertinent to them. I have to apologise that I've not actually read all of the report through. I've actually just came back from holiday on Saturday, so trying to catch up with things. But I do know that in previous years we have commented on the fact that it is really good to see good news stories, but I would agree with a comment earlier that sometimes there's lots of things, and we've just heard a comment this morning with regard to the care at home services, and we know the pressures that are on providers out there, but it is impacting on service users and carers, and sometimes I'm not sure that we focus in on those things, and that's what we need to look at to ensure that you know, we're delivering the best that we possibly can. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Sorry to put you on the the spot there, but I think it's important that we get that kind of flavour. So are there any other points before we move on from this? Nope. Well, we've been asked to approve the annual performance report for 21-22 as was attached. Are we happy to approve that for this year, taking into account the comments for working towards next year's?
Happy to approve.
Okay, thank you, folks. Right, we're now moving on to section 5, which is governance and assurance, and poor Jane again. She's representing Jackie. This is strategic risk management update. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to note in the strategic risk report to the committee that our ongoing review of risks has led to a number of changes to the level of risk since the last report to the Audit and Performance Committee. However, members will note that we have a number still of significant high risks. Those are particularly the availability of financial resources, workforce, capacity and flow, and the viability of external providers. The report, however, sets out the range of actions that we continue to take across the range of services and across our governance frameworks to address the level of risk, and we'll continue to provide regular updates to the committee.
Okay, are there any points of clarity or any questions that anybody has around this? Donald.
Thank you, Chair. Just one, if I may. It's on. It's numbered as risk 10, primary care. 2 points. If I read the narrative, the sustainability of primary care services internal audit was jointly commissioned by Angus IGB, Perth and Kinross IGB, and Tayside. And I suppose my first question was to clarify, did Dundee IGB not also take part in that? And then my second point was, I see there was going to be a workshop on the 7th of September, and since that date's now passed, is there any update on the outputs from that workshop?
Thank you, Donald. My understanding of the way in which the kind of collectively commissioned report came about was the fact that primary care was a risk in the Perth and Kinross risk register, the Angus and the Tayside. Even if it was in Dundee, the internal audit function hadn't picked it up as in scope for an audit. So when three parts of the system had I see Jackie's joined us and she may want to come in, but you know, it reflects the risks for those organisations and the decision by Audit to do it in a collective manner. Jackie, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes, it might just be helpful. And you've obviously seen that that there's been this kind of areas being commented on in the reports later on the agenda. The workshop did take place on the 7th of September around the primary care risks, and the auditors were present to present their report, and they are working towards getting actions from that meeting and from those who are present, and I would hope to bring the actual final report to the next meeting of this committee. With regard to Dundee not highlighting this area as being a particular high risk for them, they certainly will not have been excluded from this, although their auditors have not taken part in this. Under our internal audit arrangements, we co-source so that some audit work is undertaken by Perth and Kinross Council auditors and some audits are undertaken by NHS Tayside auditors. And this was a piece of work that was taken forward collectively by NHS Tayside auditors, and it does have sort of a wider scope than we would have specifically articulated for Perth and Kinross integration joint boards risks, but it's a more holistic approach. So certainly Dundee will not have been excluded from it, from the scope of it, but and ultimately it's a decision for them as to whether or not they present the findings of this at their committee, but it's certainly possible that they would be able to do so. As I say, I know that there was a good meeting that took place on the 7th of September, and I'm hopeful to be able to bring something more concrete to you at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or points, clarity, comments? Councillor David Illingworth.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very as a newbie to this committee, it's quite scary to see how many reds and very, very high risks there are in the risk. But I think this is a really valuable exercise, and it highlights the issues that this committee is going to face, or this board is going to face, over the coming years. So very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, David. The one thing that I was going to ask for a bit of clarity is, these are all as we're speaking at the moment, but do these build in our challenges, particularly with the winter period and our winter planning? Are these all taken into account in those risks?
At a point in time they are, Chair, but obviously in bringing this paper forward, that cut-off for consideration would have been several weeks ago now, although you know, the risk around capacity and flow, for example, and workforce are at their highest possible score. So even with kind of even further you know, pressure on the system, the actual strategic risk can't get any higher.
Thank you for that. A final chance, opportunity for any further comments?
I did put a Q in the chat box.
Oh, sorry, Sheila, I didn't see that.
That's okay. My question really is just about the reference number on the tables. I'm trying to understand what it means. So, for example, on the item where it said action removed reference 16 SR, or not, there's the best 14 partnership premises. On the table above, it's new improvement action added, and it's item 7. SR 14 partnership premises. So I'm not quite sure. I know there's a 14A, but it's the reference itself. You know, it's reference 16 in one place and it's reference 7 somewhere else. So I'm just wondering what that reference number means, or what's the point of it, or the purpose of it, rather, not the point, the purpose of it.
I may ask Phil Gerard to come in, but what you're seeing there is a snapshot of the wider improvement plan, Sheila, and
No,
my understanding is
I
that
understand the improvement plan. Sorry, I know we've got a full agenda. Sorry to cut you off. It's just the numbering system I don't understand.
well, perhaps we can. I mean, we can take that offline if that's helpful. But it's a basic 1, 2, 3, 4 that's that is reflected in the improvement plan itself. Phil, I don't know if you want to raise any.
Yeah, the reference 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is just a sequential numbering system so that we can reference that in the meeting. The other reference 1D, etc., where it starts 1E, that's a direct reference to the partnership improvement plan. And
yeah,
without that, it's a danger of losing control of it. We just need to keep things tight in relation to that.
Yeah, I understand the sequential part, but it's just most risk registers I've been familiar with, the sequential number assigned stays with the risk, you know, even if it's removed or altered. So the fact that the sequential number assigned seems to vary depending on how we're presenting it is what's confusing me a little bit. But I'm used to doing these things in a project management environment where these references, like I said, are consistent throughout. That's all. So
thank you, Sheila. We'll have a look.
You've helped me a bit.
And we can have a look and perhaps
I don't want to
link with you to try and improve that. Very happy to do that.
Well, it's just a different methodology. If that's the methodology we employ here, that's fine. As long as I understand it, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything anybody else wants to contribute? Nope. Well, the committee is asked to note the IGB strategic risk register and strategic risk improvement plan, and to note the current position of the IGB strategic risk exposure scores that were presented in section 2 of the papers. Okay, thank you. We're now going to move on to the partnership improvement plan / audit recommendations update, and I think this is bringing them both together. So I'm going to give Jane a break, and we're going to ask Phil Gerard to take us through this one, please, Phil.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. My name's Phil Gerard. I'm the Governance and Risk Coordinator for the Health and Social Care Partnership. As the Chair has just mentioned, this is the first version of the report where we have brought together our audit recommendations and our partnership improvement plan. This was something that was proposed at the last committee meeting back in March. It was felt that there was an overlap against actions in the partnership improvement plan and some of the actions in the audit recommendations paper. So the committee agreed that we should amalgamate these reports to make it a bit simpler and easier to keep track of things. The details of the process to achieve this amalgamation are included in the report. So today's report not only considers the existing actions in the partnership improvement plan, but also improvement actions which have been identified through our annual review of governance. You will see these actions later on in the annual accounts paper. It's in the annual governance statement section there. And it's detailed, these AGS actions are detailed in table 1 of today's report. What we have did with these 3 of these improvement actions from the AGS have been incorporated into existing partnership improvement actions, with all the others identified as being new actions. However, we have 2 further actions which were identified post the approval of the draft AGS by the IGB in June on behalf of the Audit and Performance Committee. These haven't been aligned yet into the PIP actions, and they will do. Also, we have 5 actions that you'll see in the AGS that haven't been aligned either. These are actions, the section requiring collaboration with our statutory partners. They haven't been aligned yet into the partnership improvement plan. Apologies for this. This should have happened. These will all be new improvement actions, and they're all detailed at the end of section 4 in the annual accounts. So these 2 new AGS actions which were identified after approval of the draft AGS, and these 5 actions will be included in the partnership improvement plan, which will be reported and brought forward to the next committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I think it is quite a complex picture when you're looking through these papers, particularly when it's your first meeting, as there's a lot of us here are. But I think in essence, what we're hoping to use is this partnership improvement plan, which incorporates now the audit recommendations, should be a major document that we as a group will be monitoring as we're going through. I'm glad people are nodding their head because that was my understanding. So on that basis, can I ask if there are any questions or comments around this? Everybody's more than happy with it. That's something. Okay. Well, if there's no comments or points on this one, we'll just note that the audit recommendations have now been amalgamated into the partnership improvement plan.
Sorry, I was going to ask a question, but for some reason the chat hasn't come up fast enough. If I may.
Sorry, Sheila.
No,
welcome. Come in with your question.
Well, it's kind of a mixture of a question and a comment, and again, I might have missed it, but one of the very IP 39 is we talk about inpatient mental health services, but I'm just wondering where the outpatient mental health services improvement action plans are, because you can't really have one without the other, I don't think, unless I'm missing it completely.
Did anybody want to take?
If I can just come in there, Sheila, as you're probably aware, there's been particular discussions ongoing about the governance arrangements around inpatient mental health specifically, which is why it's drawn out for an area of specific attention. It's as simple as that. Those services that sit within the context of inpatient services and the governance arrangements, it's really is as simple as that. We wouldn't draw out outpatients as part of any other service specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I have, to be fair to this committee, I have raised it already at the Health Board, the last meeting recently, because for a lot of mental health issues, the outpatient services is almost as crucial as preventing inpatient services. And this was again about service improvement and looking at capacity for inpatient services. So I think, and I'm talking very specifically here about people with learning disabilities and other intellectual challenges or conditions. And so it just seems to be dealing with inpatient services and improvement there are very much dependent upon effective outpatient services and early detection and improvement. And I do notice that in here generally we don't seem to have a parent-child relationship, so that's partly why I asked the question. Is it Phil that's the sort of project risk manager? Because very often, a lot of these issues in terms of improvement and indeed in terms of the risk register are often interdependent on others. That it's hard for them to be dealt with in isolation. So I think that's just something for us to be mindful of, because certainly the outpatient services and including how people are supported through the social work teams, I think goes a long way towards the improvement that may be required in terms of certainly capacity and experience of mental health inpatient services. So I just think that's a little bit of a gap somewhere. So while it might not be covered specifically, I think it needs to be perhaps noted as a dependency or a contributing factor or an input or something like that. Again, this is a fairly linear, straightforward single tier improvement plan, similarly with the risk register, but nothing's that simple, sadly.
Yeah, and just to respond to you, I think what I would say is the partnership improvement plan is very much about the IJB's governance arrangements. What underpins that are a range of other governance arrangements that support, in particular, clinical care governance arrangements that support both of Perth and Kinross Council and their service delivery, and NHS Tayside and their service delivery. All of those services are supported by operational risk registers. That's reflected in the paper that we'll come on to, and we have an escalation process for for reviewing that. But the partnership improvement plan couldn't even begin to consider all of the interdependencies that exist across the system. It's very much driven by the annual review of governance, by audit recommendations, and by other external reports. And at this stage, there has been nothing to suggest at this level that we should have anything in relation to outpatient services. That's not to say that we don't absolutely support the interdependency between inpatient and outpatient. It's just not something that sits in this partnership improvement plan at this point.
No, I can see it doesn't sit there. I'm suggesting that it should at least be noted as a dependency, because I don't think,
as I say, Sheila, if we noted all dependencies in this report, it wouldn't focus on the areas of partnership improvement at an IJB strategic level.
So I'm sorry to keep on about this, but this is the audit improvement.
Sheila, you've gone on to mute.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I was trying to be a good attendee and muting my microphone. This is an audit and performance committee, and my understanding is part of our role is to scrutinise what comes before us. And so I'm using this as an example. I mean, if that's not the role of members of this committee, then I'll be happy to stand corrected. But right now I'm challenging the improvement, the effectiveness of the improvement plan if we don't consider somewhere along the way what the dependencies are, and make sure that somehow, that if there's an improvement plan somewhere else to outpatient services, I'm using this as an example because I'm familiar with it. But if there's an improvement plan somewhere else, then that's fine. But and there should be. But these things cannot stand in isolation, particularly when it comes to mental health services, because very often, when people become in need of mental health services, particularly inpatient services, the start of it is way before they actually get referred to an inpatient service. And so therefore we absolutely, I think, have to at least acknowledge that there is a dependency somewhere else that will influence the improvement plan that we're trying to put in place. Now, if that's not the role of members of this committee to challenge and to ask questions and to try and understand better, if we're just expected to just look at the papers, ask some questions, be answered, and then nod them all through, then that's fine. At least then I'll understand that. But my understanding was this was a scrutiny committee, and I'm trying to provide some constructive, well, I would like to think constructive feedback. And I know it's not all within the scope of this IGB, but inpatient, outpatient services, and indeed how people with intellectual capacity are supported in the community is very much the role of Perth and Kinross Council through this IG, or the Health and Social Care Partnership. So I just find it somewhat incongruous that the two aren't somehow signposted to each other. And like I said, I did raise this at the Tayside Health Board as well, because I think that's a huge gap. Because by the time people come seeking inpatient services, very often the situation has become more acute, and so to try and improve that service, including capacity and everything else, we have to do some improvement further down the line, I think.
Thanks, thank you, Sheila. I don't think anybody's questioning our ability to scrutiny, and I think one of the things that we probably need to look at from this committee's perspective is the three main areas of performance, risk and audit. And I think one of the things we need to look at is how we do this in a more simplified and thorough way, in the sense that I think when we look at the clinical care governance, which addresses a lot of the issues that you're raising, but in a slightly different perspective. So I think what we need to look at is how we make this a bit more simple, and the codependencies of risk and performance and audit. So I get exactly what you're saying, because as another newbie with David, it is quite daunting looking at all those reams of paper which seem to be saying pretty similar things but in slightly different ways. So I think that's something that I'd agree with you. We're here to look at and to be able to identify where we need to focus on. And I think at the moment we're still in quite a position of trying to work out what they are. So I value your comments, and I think Jane would as well, and it's something that we would want to look at going forward for how we streamline it. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay, so again, then we'll just reaffirm that the committee notes that audit recommendations have now been amalgamated into the Partnership Improvement Plan, and it also notes the progress towards achievement of actions within the Partnership Improvement Plan. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Next item, we're moving into the Internal Audit Progress Report. Jackie, welcome. I can hand over to you at this point to take us through this item on the agenda, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jackie Clark and I'm the Chief Internal Auditor for the Integration Joint Board, with my primary organisation being Perth and Kinross Council. This report presents a progress report on internal audit activity since the last meeting of the Audit and Performance Committee. We have already discussed one of the items which is included within the progress report, namely that being the final report for primary care, which the work has been completed, and the draft report was shared with management originally back in May. We discussed that there was a workshop on the 7th of September, and that I hope to present the final report to this committee in November. Another area of activity has been the corporate services report, which has been ongoing for some time to finalise, and that is on the agenda for today's meeting. And the final item I'd like to draw your attention to is the reconsideration of the previously planned leadership capacity review, which has been it's been impacted by the change in leadership within the IJB, and with Jackie Pepper coming in as Chief Officer. It links very much with the proposed audits that are in the internal audit plan for 22-23, which is later on the agenda. I'm happy to pick that up there, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has regarding this particular report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Have we any thoughts, questions or comments from any members of the committee? Donald.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Just a quick question, please. This point around having some sort of a memorandum of understanding or some form of an agreement around corporate support. I mean, that could take an awful long time to agree if we start from scratch. And I just want, are there any precedents that we can follow, perhaps for other boards or other IJBs, that might help us to get to an answer more quickly on this one? Because I do think it's something that we need.
Thank you for the question. That relates to the actual audit report on corporate support, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Right,
That's
okay.
actually the next item. You've jumped ahead of yourself, Don. You're too efficient. Any other questions on the general reports? Hey, we're steaming through this morning, aren't we? This is great. Okay, well, thank you for that. The committee's just been asked to note the progress on the internal audit progress report. And Jackie, if you just stay there for the internal audit report on corporate support. If you could give us an update on that, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an audit report which has been undertaken by my colleagues in NHS Tayside on my behalf. And this audit was to ensure that adequate arrangements are in place for the delivery of corporate support functions for the partnership and for the IJB. The overall assessment from this audit at the time was that there was a limited assurance on controls, meaning that there were some gaps and some weaknesses which required addressing. And these are highlighted within the report. It presents the key findings from the report, and along with the agreed actions, of which there are 3, 2 of which are of high importance. And were agreed with management. I'm happy to take any questions, but going back to the previous question. That may well be something that I think Jane may know more about as she is progressing with the action at the moment.
Jane, do you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you. If only it were so simple as to go out to other health board areas and pick up good practice. It's on areas like finance, perhaps on particular aspects of the business that we do. That opportunity for sharing is there, and we rely on it heavily, and it makes a major difference. But for areas like this, there's not that natural kind of forum in which we can share good practice. So we're not particularly aware of good practice. We have got contacts that we can share with, but I think in Tayside we simply need to come together to build. We're not starting from a blank sheet. We've got a number of corporate services and support on these that are working well. We've got areas where we kind of need to do better, but it doesn't stand in a vacuum either, as both partner bodies, as was mentioned earlier in the committee, face significant financial challenges. One of the difficulties we face is that the corporate support that we do get are under review, are looking at contraction, and that is all part of the landscape as well. So it's a interesting landscape, but one where coming together collaboratively is the only way that will drive it forward.
Okay. I was going to ask I know that the corporate responsibility seems to come down a lot to Perth and Kinross Council at this point, but in the spirit of the partnership, both having a responsibility, I was just wondering why it wasn't distributed to anyone in NHS Tayside. The 4 distribution lists are all very focused. I just think that is there a reason that might not go to NHS Tayside, who are really have a part responsibility in some of this corporate support?
Thank you for that. This report was commissioned for this body here. Right. Following its presentation, all reports are considered under a joint working protocol, joint reporting protocol, and would then be taken forward by my NHS colleagues to share internally with NHS. But because this was commissioned for the Perth and Kinross IJB, it comes here first.
Okay.
And thanks, likewise, I will consider it with my Perth and Kinross Council hat on.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions, any points of note or comments? Nope. Okay, then we're asked to note the progress made on this report. And then we're going to the internal audit strategy and plan.
Thank you. Me again. This report presents the internal audit strategy and plan for 22-23, and is presenting to you a risk-based audit plan which has been agreed and considered, taking into consideration a mapping exercise with other external scrutiny functions that we're aware of, with the detailed risk registers, which you've already considered today, and also with discussions with the Chief Officer and the Head of Finance and Corporate Support to bring to you a plan which covers those risks which are significant for the partnership and for the IJB, and which will be able to be delivered in an achievable internal audit plan. There are 3 areas which have been highlighted, one of which is a carry forward in some respects of a review of leadership capacity. However, there is a change in focus in that to be more of a critical friend to the management team in ensuring that with regard to their thinking in this area and moving that forward. The other 2 areas are the more traditional audits, and as you can see on the report, the areas that have been highlighted are that of the sustainability of commission service providers, which we've already discussed as being a key risk, but also a risk around the premises and property through which the IJB delivers its functions. I'm happy to take any questions if any of the committee have any.
Yeah, I wonder if I could start just about the first issue about leadership capacity. And I know that, you know, my question around that is probably shared by others, in the sense of what would we be able to see as a result of this piece of work to allow us to identify that something has been done. I accept that a critical friend of the Chief Officer and the management team is a useful function, but how would we be able to, as a committee, get something to tell us what was achieved and whether there was some value there in that piece of work?
Right, thanks for that question. I would provide to the Audit and Performance Committee, as part of the update report, a summary of the work that's been done and the activity that's occurred, so that you will be able to see what is, you know, what the progress has been on that. The reasons for not providing an in-depth report is so that there can be an open and kind of dynamic review, and I can be the critical friend. But you certainly would see something in a document that you'd be able to look at, which would tell you what work has been done. In addition to that, the outcomes of that really focuses my thinking when it comes to future internal audit strategies and plans, and as to what would be included there. So it is distinctly likely that following on from this work as a critical friend, in a year or two, it may well be that there's some consideration for something that comes out of that. That's typical of any more of the consultancy style internal audit approaches.
Donald, your question?
Yeah, I'd been going to ask about the same point, actually, maybe just coming at it from a slightly different angle. Because previously this was in the plan as a formal internal audit report that would have come to this committee in full, and now it won't. And I'm not sure that I fully understand the rationale for that change. I think, you know, the critical friend role is a really important one that internal audit can fulfill. But as I said, I was just surprised and I suppose just slightly concerned that we might lose an insight into something that was previously on the internal audit plan. And I accept your comment that it may shape future audit plans in a year or two, were your words. But I suppose if there are real issues around leadership capacity still, I would rather know about them now. So, as I say, I just need to understand more about the rationale.
Thank you for that question. The leadership capacity audit from the previous internal audit plan was from a specific point in time with the previous chief officer to ensure that the capacity review was undertaken and was effective. Over time, obviously the previous chief officer has left. Jackie Pepper was appointed initially in interim and then successful in the full appointment to the chief officer role, and that a discussion took place about what would actually add the most value to the organisation, to the partnership, in ultimately delivering its outcomes and objectives. As part of the role of critical friend, I wouldn't shy away from making recommendations that any issues regarding leadership capacity will be brought back to you by the chief officer if there were any to be brought forward. But that would be for the chief officer to bring to you rather than for me in my capacity as critical friend to bring to you. So although there won't necessarily be any formal reports and action plans brought to this committee from me, it doesn't mean that there won't be from the chief officer or others as a result of the critical friend role that I play.
And I think that difference that you just pointed out there is the one that still makes me quizzical. I mean, we have had a change in chief officer. You know, you're right, but now have we just moved any issues of capacity somewhere different? So I'm still not. I don't. I may be in a minority on this one, but I'm just still not clear whether it's right for this committee to accept a lower level of visibility than it would have had under the previous report that would have come from yourself to the committee. And you know, if I'm in a minority on that, I'm quite happy to step back. I'd just be interested to know others' thoughts.
I don't know if there's anybody else has any thoughts on this. I know that it's a question that I have raised in the past, and that's why I raised it today for clarity, to make sure that everyone was happy, because it was changed and I couldn't quite get my head around the critical friend role and how we weren't privy to the critical friendly advice. But I was assured that there's going to be a final report which will work towards that. But is there any other thoughts, questions around that? Nope. I think, sorry, Jackie, you want to come back in?
Yeah, what I will say is that there will be visibility over the activity. It won't necessarily be in as much detail and in the same format as a formal audit report, but you will get some visibility as to if there's any specific outcomes from myself. And as I say, if there's anything which, as a result of this work, is requiring action as part of the chief officer, then the chief officer would be the responsible person to bring anything forward. But I would be prepared to comment on my update if I think things haven't been done, or if not enough has been done, or to comment to say that the work that has been done is, in my opinion, sufficient to at that point in time.
It might be helpful, Jackie, for particularly Donald and myself, if you could sort of indicate how much time will be spent as a percentage, or is it a third of the programme of hours you have, or is this less or more?
As stated in the report, we have an allocation of 40 days across both of our organisations, from the council and from the NHS. I would anticipate that we will be looking at, for this one, an allocation of between 10 and 12 days that would be available for this.
Okay,
bearing in mind that within the 40 days, that includes my supporting the IJB and also undertaking the reports and the scrutiny to bring forward an internal audit plan and my year-end report as well.
Thanks. Maybe just to try and find a way forward on this one then. And perhaps part of this is just waiting to see what the outcome of this critical friend report is, and that coming back in summary form to this committee. And then I suppose I'd certainly reserve my position to re-raise the point at the point once I've had the chance to consider that. I suppose I do see that this is down for a target committee of June 2023, which feels like quite a long way away as we sit here. And I just wonder whether there's the opportunity to bring this piece of work a little bit sooner up the audit timetable.
I can certainly look at doing that, and I'll work with Jackie Pepper to see if we can bring that further forward.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe if that could be captured as an action and reported back to the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Donald. Well, we've been asked to approve this, so is there any challenges or anybody unhappy with approving this plan for next year? Nope. Approved? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Sorry, I was just suggesting that before we go into the annual accounts, we have a brief break for, I was going to say 10 minutes, but probably if we came back at 11, that would give us about 7 minutes. You've got time to put the kettle on or whatever. So if we could have a quick break and we'll come back at 11 o'clock to look at the annual accounts. Thank you very much. Right, thank you very much. I hope you've had time to do whatever you needed to do. We're now going to go into the annual accounts, and I'm going to hand over to Jane for this. Please, Jane.
Thank you. If I can first of all take paper 6.1 on assurances received from our partners. The IJB's, the adequacy of the IJB's governance arrangements is strongly linked to the effectiveness of the governance within NHS Tayside, Perth and Kinross Council, and in relation to lead partner services, Angus and Dundee IJB. And we're pleased to bring forward assurances from all of those parties apart from Dundee, which we fully expect to come forward to the committee at its next meeting. Happy to take any questions on the assurances paper.
Donald.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jane. I mean, I suppose the question I have is how does, well, one, the absence of the Dundee IJB report, and two, the NHS Tayside report seems to be for a prior year, if I'm reading it right. It's the annual report of the Care Governance Committee 2020-21. I'm just wondering, how does this affect our ability then to approve the accounts? Oh.
So I think perhaps the annual report on the Care Governance Committee, we might perhaps need to put to one side, because what you have from NHS Tayside is an overarching assurance about their overarching governance arrangements, which will include clinical care governance. So I recognise what you're saying, Donald. Perhaps the annual report on care governance does need to sit to one side, but what we have got, as I say, is that overarching assurance. In relation to Dundee, you're absolutely right, that is a gap. It's a gap that was there last year at this time also, and just reflects the delay that Dundee in particular seem to experience in relation to having their accounts audited by Audit Scotland, and there is it's not within our scope to address that, but it is a gap, you're right, in assurance.
And I think because when you go into the annual accounts themselves, there's references to us having assurance from the other two IGBs and also NHS Tayside. And I just wonder whether the comments in the accounts themselves need to be amended to reflect that gap.
I mean, our external auditors are with us today, and that may be something that needs a small amendment to make sure that we recognise that gap, Donald.
Okay. Would external audit want to comment at this point?
Good morning, it's Michael Wilkie from External Audit. I would be content with a revision being made to the financial statements to make clear the situation that arises. I think perhaps expanding the language to include a statement about the extent to which the board is aware or not aware of any governance issues would be relevant then in that case, as opposed to just a statement that it has not received the formal assurance at the date of approval. So, for example, expanding on that to explain its understanding of any governance issues or not, as the case may be.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, well, thank you for that. We'll move on to the annual accounts themselves for 21-22. Jean, could I hand over to you again for that, please?
Thank you, Chair. On the 27th of June of this year, the Integration Joint Board approved the unaudited annual accounts for 21-22. The audit of the accounts has taken place between July and August, and the results of that external audit are contained within the external audit report. I'm going to pass over to Michael Wilkie from KPMG to outline the findings of the external audit report.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Michael Wilkie, so I am the Director responsible for the delivery of our audit services to the board. From KPMG, we are external auditors, and this is the final year of our appointment, being 6 years extended as a result of COVID, and before you rotate to new external auditors in the form of Audit Scotland. So this report is our draft annual audit report, which will be updated to final once I've issued my opinion on the financial statements, and it presents the conclusions from our audit work. I'm going to refer to a couple of pages within it, but I don't intend to go through the entire document at all. Page 3 of our report, or 177 of the pack, sets out our executive summary, and the key points to highlight are that I intend to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements following their approval by the board. We also satisfactorily conclude on 2 significant risks that were identified at the outset of the audit. Both of those significant risks are presumed to exist in any audit, so they are not unique to the board itself. The first is management's ability, because of their position within an organisation, to potentially override controls, and we design our procedures in order to address that risk and did not identify any instances where that had occurred. Equally, we accept the risk that is presumed to exist in most audits around management's ability to manipulate income recognition, or in a public sector context also expenditure recognition. So that's particularly as you come towards the year end, there's an increased risk of either pulling income or expenditure forwards or backwards in order to present a particular financial position. Again, we design tests to identify if that has occurred and have nothing to bring to your attention. And the last part I would highlight in our conclusion in respect of the audit is that we concur with management's proposed going concern basis of preparation, i.e. that the joint board will continue for the foreseeable future, 12 months from the date of signing. We also, just as a reminder, use a level of materiality, and that determines the extent of testing which we carry out on the balances within the accounts themselves, and that was set at £2.3 million, or approximately 1% of expenditure. There were no adjusted or unadjusted audit differences, so no misstatements identified through our audit process that needed to be processed or which have been left unprocessed. We also carry out wider scope work, so that's what goes beyond the numbers in the financial statements. We provide quite a lot of commentary within the report, which I won't touch on, but perhaps just turn to 2 recommendations which are within the appendix. So Appendix 4, that's page 30 of our report, or 201 of your pack. The first is in respect of the revised draft integration scheme. We've previously recommended for a number of years a move, or encouraged a move, to proportionate risk sharing in respect of over and underspends. And note that as drafted, the revised scheme states that an overspend may be shared in proportion to partners' contributions to the IJB, but would highlight that it does not explicitly deal with the situation should that not be the case, i.e. should partners not decide to exercise that option. And I use the word option because of the word may. And I would recommend that the scheme is expanded to make clear what would happen in that circumstance, i.e. that it would revert presumably to partners being responsible for meeting operational overspends in their own areas. The reason that is important is because that supports the joint board's financial sustainability by effectively providing that backstop that partners are ultimately responsible for funding overspends. The second recommendation made this year is in respect of financial sustainability also, and relates to the letter from Scottish Government citing that intention spoken about earlier to potentially reclaim surplus unutilised COVID reserves. And the points that I would highlight and spoke to management in that respect is just that should that arise, it's important that the board gives consideration to any governance or approvals that may be required in order to authorise that spend effectively, or return or refund in whatever form it takes, and also to give consideration to how that expenditure essentially would be reflected within next year's financial statements. That's a point for management to consider, and then your new auditors rather than me, but I think it's an important thing to think about because it may be something that has not occurred from an IJB accounting perspective before, so it's worth giving some thought to. I wouldn't intend to highlight anything else in our report. Those are the key points, so I will just pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Jane, are you wanting to mention anything about the management response to the risk sharing agreement?
Absolutely. Just to note that I've already been in touch with colleagues around making that essential change, and we'll report back to perhaps via yourself, Chair, around our progress to make that change that's been highlighted.
Okay. Any further questions, Donald?
Yeah, I suppose my first reaction was how easy it will be to make a change in the new integration scheme documents, given that they've been through quite a substantial process of engagement. And linked to that, could you maybe, Jane, explain to me what is our position as an IJB on this issue of having a risk sharing agreement in place? Because I'm conscious we're certainly an outlier vis-a-vis the other Tayside IJBs, our health and social care partnerships. Yeah, I suppose what's our rationale for being in that place, and are we? Is this an issue that applies to other IJBs, or are we very much one of a kind in not having a risk sharing agreement?
Thank you, Donald. The first point to note is that the decision on the risk sharing arrangements for the IJB are for the partners, and in relation to the revised integration scheme, I am aware and have participated in a number of discussions that have gone on to deliberate around a move to proportionate share. And for reasons that are pertinent to the partners, their individual financial positions, their considerations of risk, financial risk, have made the decision not to move to proportionate share fully at this point. In terms of an IJB view, I'm not sure that's ever formally been sought by the partners in terms of feeding into their deliberations, but certainly routinely as part of discussions at this committee, there has certainly been a general kind of feeling that we absolutely should be moving to proportionate share. As you say, that is the position across most of the rest of Scotland, and we are and remain an outlier.
I mean, is there anything we can do? I'm not necessarily suggesting at this point we look to give a direction to the partners to enter into a risk sharing agreement. I'm not sure that would even be competent, probably not. But is there anything that we can do as an IJB to encourage those discussions? Because it does feel like we're an outlier on this.
I guess there's two things coming from today, isn't there? One, to make sure that, based on the current integration scheme and the May, that, even if they don't move, that there's the backstop. I mean, Michael's talked about we need to understand and it be clear what the backstop is, and that's the main action. But in terms of using that May and encouraging the partners to move to address that, that is absolutely something that the committee could perhaps decide to make representations to move in that direction. It will then be for both partners to make their own jointly and individually to consider whether that's where they want to go.
Are you happy with that, Donald? Thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? No. Can I just take the opportunity to thank you in particular and KPMG in general for all your support for the last 6 years. I know that I haven't been involved, but I can look at the report and look at the work that's been done in the last 6 years and would like to recognise that in the minutes and thank you for your support.
Can I also echo that and thank Michael and his team? It's not a word perhaps that you might expect to use, but we have enjoyed working with KPMG over the last number of years, and it's going to be a major change to move. I know it's all part of the cycle of audit, but thank you, Michael. Thanks to you and your team.
Thank you, Jane. I would echo that back to you. It's been a pleasure working together. I think we've challenged and supported each other and had a productive relationship throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that note, we're asked to note the oh, sorry, Dee.
Yeah, can I just thank the finance team? When KPMG come and give an unqualified statement, that's great news. It just means, because without a great finance team, nothing else is possible. That you cannot get people out to people's homes. You cannot make sure the care is delivered, because if you don't have financial stability, nothing else is possible. So I'd like to thank them.
Thank you, David. I'm sure that's echoed by the rest of the committee. Okay, so we're asked to note the contents of KPMG's annual report to members of Perth and Kinross IGB and the Controller of Audit on the 2021 audit. We're also asked to approve the audited annual accounts for 21-22 and approve the letter of representation for signature by the Head of Finance and Corporate Services. I gather that is now something that we don't need to formally watch Jane signing something, but if we're happy, we can approve those. Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Now, sadly, for those of you that thought I had made an error in the agenda, we agreed beforehand that we would look at the appointment of external audit after we had completed the annual accounts. It seemed a bit tactless to tell them that we weren't going to use KPMG and then ask them to give us a report, but we thank KPMG, as we've already said, for all their service, but we are now looking at the appointment of our accountants. Can I hand over to Jane?
Thank you. Yes, I think as already has been mentioned as part of the annual cycle, Audit Scotland have now been confirmed as the external auditor for Perth and Kinross IGB for the audits from 2022-23 to 2026-27. Just to advise the Audit Performance Committee of that.
Anybody, any questions or queries? Sheila?
Thank you. Thanks for that very brief report. It's very welcome. I'm just curious about the tender or the contract agreement with Audit Scotland. Do you know if we have rates fixed for the duration of the contract? The reason I ask
could you repeat that, Sheila, for JB?
Yes, I can. Do we know in the contract agreement we have with Audit Scotland whether or not we have fixed rates for the duration of the contract?
Sheila, we have had no discussion at this point with Audit Scotland about their proposed fee. That's considered on an annual basis, but within a kind of framework, a fee framework that is set across Scotland, for which there is some flexibility to increase the fee, but only to a very limited extent. So, but we've had no discussions yet with Audit Scotland around that fee. But as I say, it's reviewed on an annual basis, but as part of a Scotland-wide agreed fee framework.
So I've just had rather a bruising encounter on another separate organisation altogether with Audit Scotland, where the fees did change quite dramatically depending on the experience and qualification of the auditor. So while it was within a framework, it was unaffordable for this other organisation that I was a part of. So, and I'm a bit intrigued therefore if they went out to tender, how they were able to select Audit Scotland without having a fee agreement put in place. So I think if that still has to be firmed up, I think it would be advisable to ensure that we have some very key parameters around the fee arrangements for the duration of the contract.
Thanks, Sheila. Just to confirm, those fee parameters are set nationally, not locally by us.
No, I do. I do.
Yeah.
What I mean, though, Jane, is that the organisation that I was a member of, it was associate with Perth and Kinross Council. It was somebody that I was assigned to as a councillor, but it was lots of different councils working together. It was quite a small organisation, and Audit Scotland was their auditor. And while the fees had been manageable, the Audit Scotland put in place, whether or not it was due to availability or whether or not it was, I don't know why, but whatever happened towards the end of the arrangement, the fees went up substantially. I'm not talking about a few pounds, I'm talking about almost doubling or trebling. It was unsustainable for that particular organisation. And it was, although it was within the fee framework, it was to do with the qualification or the seniority of the something. I can't remember the exact details, so I'm going to be careful what I say here, but it was to do with the personnel deployed on the contract. The fee framework, the fees rose quite substantially. I mean, there was an ongoing dispute. I'm not even sure if it's resolved yet with Audit Scotland. So all I'm suggesting is that when we do get down to finalising that we have we take some care around the what we agree will be provided. It's a bit, well, that's all I'll say at the moment. I'm happy to chat to offline about this. Yeah.
Extreme care will be taken, Sheila, and indeed a paper comes to the Audit and Performance Committee to agree the fee. So you'll have an opportunity to scrutinise that before the fee's set on an annual basis.
Okay, so I'm maybe not making myself clear here. So while it comes along on an annual basis is exactly what happened before, and then towards the end of the arrangement, the latter years, the deployment of resources by Audit Scotland, while within the fee framework, was substantially more than was there before, and the work had already been done. So my advice or suggestion would be to perhaps look for the duration of this arrangement and put in some parameters around which the fee framework will sit for us. Otherwise, we could leave ourselves a little bit exposed. That's all.
Okay, thanks for that, Sheila. That's been noted, and I think we've just been asked as a committee to note the appointment, and we'll be looking at that in future meetings. So that concludes the annual accounts section, and we're now on to clinical and care governance, which is the last major element of the agenda. I think just before we start our discussions, I think I alluded to earlier on, and I think a lot of people are felt the same about the confusion and the amount of documents around clinical and care governance, and I think it's worth putting into context that this whole area has been a bit of a discussion in previous committees and with the IGB itself as to whether we had a separate clinical and care governance meeting or whether we incorporated it in this agenda. And I think we need to look at it in the context of that. And I think it's also worth noting that we're asked to note the review and the consideration of the operational risks and the impact on the IGB strategic risk profiles. So there's an element I'd like to highlight. This is not about managing the operational impact, but about the impact on the IGB strategic risk profile. And we're also asked to note the assurance provided to the Audit and Performance Committee on the clinical and care governance systems in place within NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council. So that's what we're actually looking at under this area. But I think as we're going through this, we can maybe have some discussion about how this committee is best served looking at this area. So I don't know who's going to take this. Is it Jane? I'll hand over to Jane, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as the Chair says, we've been on a long journey, but this is the third report to the Audit and Performance Committee that tries to do two things. It tries to provide assurance to the Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board that a robust clinical and care governance system is in place within NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council, and that reflects where responsibility sits for clinical care governance. So an aim of the report, and I guess a recognition of the level of detail that sits behind this report, is to provide that assurance. The second part of the report is to give ensure that there is transparency to our review of operational risks that sit within the clinical care governance domain, and that the Audit and Performance Committee can see the escalation, the consideration of those risks, and the escalation into our consideration of the IJB's strategic risks. So, as I say, this is the third report. It has, this style of reporting very much reflects a journey that the committee have been on to make sure that that assurance could be provided and that the role of the IJB was understood. There's a number of us on the meeting today that are happy to take any questions that arise.
Okay. I'll open the discussion to any particular points or any general thoughts. Anyone want to start? One of the things that probably I was keen that we try and look at is how we make this a bit more manageable in an overview of the whole area. And I don't know what anybody else's thoughts were, how convinced you were that this gave you a flavour of the assurance that we require in this committee about the clinical and care governance processes across our parent bodies. Donald?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are an awful lot of trees here, and the challenge is seeing the wood in it, and I think it'd probably be a mistake for us to try and redesign the reports or the structures on the hoof. I think it is something that would merit, a step back, a development session, or a discussion to try and work out what we need to see, and to pick up on Jane's point that we don't find ourselves drifting into territory that is actually should be the responsibility of the partners. So I think I share your comments, Chair, and I think it is one that merits more of a good look at what do we actually want to get out of this report.
Any other thoughts? Sheila?
Thank you. It's really just to echo of what's just been said. When I read this report, I wasn't quite sure what we're supposed to do with it within this committee, other than have it for information. So I think, particularly as has been referenced before, I'm certainly new to this particular committee. I'm new to NHS Tayside Board, and although I was not deputy isn't the right word. Anyway, I was a reserve for the IJB before and listened in on some committees. There's an awful lot of information here, which is crucially important. But I don't really know what we're supposed to do with it here in terms of being a scrutiny function. And it's not clear to me from the covering report of what input we would get there, other than just telling us what's gone on, which is fine because we need to know. I'm not criticising that, it's just trying to understand the context of it in relation to us as members of this committee. And I think the idea of a development session might be really helpful, actually, because there's an awful lot of information, and a lot of these papers, and I'll probably ask some daft questions that have been, some I know have probably been covered previously, but we don't have that history. So it's maybe just something we can take away collectively from this and figure out how do we make sure we do get up to speed and do get some of the history, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah,
it's very comprehensive though.
It's very comprehensive. I think it's a bit daunting for a lot of people, but it is very comprehensive, and it's useful to have those as a source of reference. But I would question how assured I would feel having read through that paperwork that things were as effective in the parent bodies as they obviously are. And I think when I was reading it, there was some who had substantial and some had reasonable risk, etc. And I was getting lost following what I would followed was reasonable and substantial. I think what would be helpful is some form of development. Unfortunately, Jackie's not here at the moment and we'd need to discuss this with Jackie, but I think one of the things that would be useful for us in this committee is to have a more informal development event looking at, particularly with some of the staff that are involved in the Clinical and Care Governance Committee of the IGB, to look at the work that has been carried out through those routes and through the council routes, and to be able to look at how we feel we would be assured that the work is appropriate and suitable for our needs to be able to monitor that. So if nobody else has any suggestions, could I suggest that we ask Jane?
Can I just ask, I mean, is it normal in previous committees for someone from the Care Governance Committee from both organisations to present to this Audit and Performance Committee? I mean, is there anybody here from NHS Tayside Care Governance Committee, for example, that we could ask questions of?
So not normally, Sheila, Jackie Pepper and Hamish Dougal as joint chairs of the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership Care Governance, our own group within the partnership would be here to present the paper. It hasn't been practice for any others to come forward and present the paper. I am conscious today that this is the last paper I would want to be presenting, and we did everything we could to make sure that wasn't the case, but nobody else could present it. But it should be Jackie and it should be Hamish, and that will be for future papers. But it's a reasonable question to ask around who else might be here to answer questions and provide that wider assurance.
Even just for this paper. And there is precedent, and certainly in the council's scrutiny committee, so I'm sure Councillor Illingworth will attest to as well, that for particular papers we do invite in people from outside bodies to be able to answer any questions as required. So, because if we had a question on NHS Tayside Clinical Care Governance Committee, there's nobody here to answer that. That isn't from NHS Tayside. But yes, it was very, very comprehensive, but a wee bit daunting. That's a good word. Thank you.
Donald.
Yeah, thanks. I think perhaps the piece of the chain we're missing is by not having Jackie and Hamish here today. And I think I'm not saying it's a bad idea to have representatives from NHS Care Governance Committee or an equivalent body for the council. But there is a risk if we do that we end up gravitating into areas that are not our responsibility. So I think let's have the development session would be my suggestion. Let's see how this works, because I mean, although I have attended, I think, 1 or 2 previous committees, my historical knowledge of this is not great either. So let's see how it works with Jackie and Hamish both present, and once we've seen that, we'll maybe have a better view on who else we might want here from the partner bodies and what is the scope of the questions that we should be asking them. So that would be my suggestion on it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that's exactly what we will do. We'll ask Jane to take it back to Jackie and see if we can organise something a bit less formal that we can have discussions with Hamish and Jackie present to look at how we get the assurance at this committee. Okay, if we're happy with that, we'll move on. We're nearly our mic's off. I'm sorry, I've just failed again. I thought I was doing so well. I just realised my mic was off. We're just talking now on the information agenda items. So the Audit and Performance Committee work plan is copied in your pack. Has anybody got any questions or clarification they want? Nope. We'll then move on to the Audit and Performance Committee record of attendance, and you'll see from that the vast changes that have happened in the committee. Is there anything that anybody wants to clarify or correct on that one? Nope. The next point on the agenda is private discussion. I know this is an opportunity that if any of the committee want to, they can have a private discussion with both the internal and external auditors. I'm assured that it's not a common practice at this committee. I know in NHST side where Sheila and I were in private discussions last week, it's a normal part of practice, but unless there's anyone wants to have a specific conversation with the auditors, we will move on to the date of the next meeting. Sheila, you've come on screen. Is there anything?
No, nothing today,
That's
but perhaps it might be. I was just going to say I felt the private discussion after the meeting was very helpful last week, actually, where we could talk a lot more forthrightly, and it's maybe something worth considering either before or afterwards. Some of the committees, the joint committees I sit on, where there's external partners, we have a pre-meeting, for example, where we can sometimes raise some issues that in advance, just to get clarity on them, that will help speed the whole committee along. So I think an opportunity to have some of that either before or after might be worth considering.
Okay, thank you.
Particularly as we get familiar with all of this and get up to speed.
Thank you. Donald.
No, I agree with Sheila. I think not for today's meeting, but I think for future meetings, there's actually value in knowing, and in both the internal and the external auditors knowing, that there is a space that they will have to raise any issues. And I think rather than having to request a private session by exception, I think it's actually quite a good practice just to have it as a regular standing item. And if it takes 2 minutes and we look at them and they look at us and say we've nothing to discuss, that's fine, but it creates a safe space. So I agree with Sheila. I think it's worth building it into the plan and having those actually convening, and if necessary then just looking at each other and moving on.
Thank you for that. We'll take note of that for future. Okay, dates of next meeting, we have Monday the 20th of November and I've just hit me that we're going on to 23, and Monday the 13th of March 2023 is the meeting thereafter for people's diaries. Before we close the meeting,
sorry, can I just ask a question about future dates? Because funnily enough, in the council we're starting to look at dates for the whole of next year, and diary management is probably one of the biggest challenges I find anyway. I'm just wondering when we would know dates for the rest of 2023.
Hi Sheila, it's Adam.
Hi Adam.
We've not set any dates yet, but these should be included on the 2023 timetable, which I think was meant to go to council but may have been pulled for this week.
Was it? All right, okay.
So
I haven't even seen it yet, Adam, but I do know that diary management is a huge issue, and so not only that, yeah.
Hopefully have them on that once it does go to council for approval.
Okay, I see Scott appearing there.
Yeah, Chair, I'm happy just to come in and confirm. Yeah, we are looking at dates for Perth and Kinross council meetings for next year, and I know the NHST side will be doing likewise. So I suggest what we do is we look at those dates as well, and probably try and bring something to the next. People hear that? I think I lost connection.
Scott, sorry, you kind of cut off halfway through that, so if you want to repeat it.
Sorry, yeah, I think I had an issue with my connection. Yeah, I think, as I say, we're looking at dates for the council, and I know NHST side will be. So my suggestion would be that we attempt to bring dates to the next IGB and audit and performance to firm these up in advance.
Thank you, Scott. We were enjoying the cliffhanger there of when it was coming back.
it's not the most exciting of subjects either, so apologies.
Thank you. Sheila, you were wanting to say something?
No, nothing else.
Okay. Well, on that note, can I thank everybody for their attendance and their input today, and we'll look forward to meeting again on the 20th of November. Thank you again.